All right, so hi everybody and welcome to the first workshop of our fall 2023 Datathon. Woo! In this workshop, we will be going over research using ChatGPT and more. Okay, so our agenda for tonight is first we're going to go over good claims. And what I mean by that is basically the conclusion you draw from your data. Then we're going to go over good research. What does good research even mean? What is good visualization? And how to put these components together to make a really, really strong Datathon entry. So what is a good claim and reasonable versus unreasonable? To start us off, I thought maybe we'd do a little exercise. So Sam observes that most cats are born with whiskers. Sam concludes that everything with whiskers must be a cat and that cats must have whiskers because it makes them cuter. Is this reasonable? No, it's not. This was not a reasonable conclusion to draw. If you make sorts of claims like these, it's important to cite your sources besides your data. What I mean by this is if Sam had Googled, hey, do all things with whiskers constitute cats? He would have found really quickly that he was wrong. That's something important, but also using sources can make your claims a lot stronger because they're backed up by things that have been tested and observed and researched by people with more degrees than we do. um, Also very important when we're thinking about making claims. Does correlation equal causation? You can type it in the chat, but I hope that you guys know that at this point, no, correlation does not equal causation. Cats having whiskers does not mean that all things are cats. If you want to say this means this definitely, maybe try phrasing like the data suggests blank. And there's also research to suggest blank. Whatever conclusions you want to draw about your own data, it's very important to make sure that they've been well researched. So when we're talking about research and stuff, what makes a good research document or paper? Before we get into that, I want to ask a question. Can ChatGPT be wrong? And again, we can type in the chat if we want to. But I think we all hopefully are aware that ChatGPT can absolutely be wrong. We totally encourage the use of ChatGPT in this datathon. In fact, if you guys recall, we even have an entire best use of AI component dedicated to ChatGPT. But when you're using ChatGPT, you may be tempted to plug in the results of your data and ask ChatGPT what this sort of thing means. When you do that, I'm not going to dissuade you from doing that, but it can be a great jumping off point, kind of like you would sort of use Wikipedia. If you guys have ever been in a class and they've told you not to use Wikipedia to cite your sources, that's usually because anyone on the internet can edit it. However, it doesn't mean that Wikipedia, like ChatGPT, can't be a great jumping off point for you to start doing some more research. Maybe Wikipedia brings up a really cool topic about ocean acidification. From there, you can say, wow, I haven't really thought about that. Let me go find some research papers on ocean acidification that kind of substantiate what Wikipedia is saying. So use ChatGPT like that. Don't just copy and paste whatever ChatGPT tells you your results mean and plug them in. Really try to go and find peer-reviewed sources that back that up. Although probably unlike Wikipedia, please tell us if you use ChatGPT. Sometimes it's gonna be wrong, but that's okay. Like even if you just used it to as a jumping off point, tell us if you used it to like write part of your code. That's cool, but like tell us. Again, there's like an entire winning section for that. So it's not going to be penalized in any way, shape, or form. It's just really what this datathon seeks to do is to make the best use of your own data analysis skills. And ChatGPT is totally a cool part of it. It's totally cool to be a part of that skill set. Just make sure you let us know you used it so we can maybe potentially give you the award for best use of artificial intelligence. But again, if you do want to use ChatGPT to draw conclusions or any other sort of AI model, make sure that you're validating with an outside source whatever conclusion it is with actual research. And on the topic of actual research, when I say actual research, I don't mean I want you to get in a lab yourself, but look at some good sources. Those look like peer-reviewed papers using Google Scholar, using the Rutgers libraries, medical journals, sites that end in .edu. Most of the time, there are some weird sites out there that like are not .edu, and there's research papers out there that are genuinely terrible. Generally, peer-reviewed papers are pretty good. Bad sources are things like strokesaremadeof.net, climate change is made of.net, Instagram posts, TikTok videos, your Aunt Linda that like almost made it into medical school. When you're looking at your sources, make sure that you're choosing good quality sources. And those are honestly mostly going to be the things that come out of a research institution or a private research institution, not generally something you might see on social media or anything with a .net or da 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 da. I also want to say, in light of us working with a climate change slash global warming type of like time series forecasting, climate change isn't real is not going to be considered something that is valid unless you really knock it out of the park with your sources and stuff, because it's just sort of taken in general scientific consensus that like it is happening. Now you can argue, feel free to absolutely argue about like the rate at which it is happening, the impact that we have on which it is happening, like go nuts with that. But like global warming slash climate change is not a thing, is like not a valid stance to take. Take something a little bit more nuanced if you want to go that route. All right, let me get to our next part and then I will answer some questions. When you are going to cite these sources, make sure that you cite with APA Chicago or MLA. Do not cite with links, and also do not cite. If you say like, yeah, temperatures are rising at an average rate of XY degrees Celsius and WZK degree in the Antarctic, like that's cool, but like make sure you cite that. Like you probably didn't come up with that yourself. Make sure you find something to back it up. Some questions to ask as you're going through your data is like, is this data indicative of the entire population? Am I running multiple hypotheses? Do I need to use different p-values? And why do we care about this? So kind of help you substantiate your claim and also maybe find some sources for you to use. Okay, I see some questions in the chat. So if you want to use Claude, go nuts. What is our research for? The presentation aspect. Okay, yes. So we're going to go over this a little bit later, like at the end of the presentation. But basically, when you have your data, you're going to, do your time series forecastings or whatever, right? And then you're going to make a PowerPoint presentation. And that PowerPoint presentation will basically just have, it can end at your results. Like that's fine. Like you can explain in your PowerPoint presentation, like what you did and like what you got. That's cool. But the Datathon submissions that are really going to stand out are going to be the ones that are like, here's the code I did, here's what I found, here's why, excuse my language, we should give like two shits about it. Why do we care that your forecasting data shows the temperature change increasing? Why is that such a big issue? Why was this data analysis even done in the first place? Don't just say winning the prize money, but like why is it important? Why do we care? Why is this a thing that we're having you focus on? And when you make that claim, which is basically what your research says, or what your data says, like let's say like, okay, this data suggests the Earth is warming. That's a fine Datathon submission, but an excellent Datathon submission is, this data suggests the Earth is warming because of XYZ, and this will have implications in the line of ABC. That is a stellar Datathon presentation and one that is absolutely a fantastic contender for the best research slash visualized project. You can go for all 4 categories if you wish. Like you can go for best research, best technique, closest forecast, and best use of AI if you want. Like feel free to try and tick all of those boxes. But if you know, like, man, I can really knock it out of the park with my use of AI, like feel free to focus more on that. I mean, it's really sort of what you want it to be. You will probably have a bigger chance of winning in some category though if you do try and excel in at least like all 4. So I think that's kind of like, I hope that answers like what the prompt's like. Are there multiple to choose from? It's basically like there's 4 winning categories and your project can end up in any one of those 4. And this presentation is more like how to at least end up in like the best research category and how to be a strong contender for that. Also, I want to say, even if you're like, no, I think I could get best forecast, like your presentation is going to be, and your submission is going to be so much stronger if you do kind of follow the model of my data suggests X will happen because of Y reason, and it will have ABC implications. That's a really strong, you know, submission. And there's also a visualization component that we're going to go over later. And I'm going to talk about how you're going to structure this. I promise we're not making you write like a 30-page research paper. It's going to be like literally just a presentation that you would make for class with maybe some more like oomph in the, the slides and stuff like that. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions before I move on to our what makes good visualization stuff? Okay. So what makes a good visualization? Visuals. So, well, for researchers, visuals are sometimes considered an addition. Not really, honestly, but I don't write this. Okay. For the public, they are essential to forming conclusions. That's very true. By the public, I think the Datathon committee is also a very good public. Although people are really going to be pulling out the magnifying glasses with you guys' submissions, the visualizations are truly the first thing that people look at when they do like a quick skim through. And so those are really essential to forming those kind of first impressions that you want, and also the last impression, aka the conclusion that you want. Incorrect visuals can lead people to make incorrect conclusions about the data. And if your visualizations look sloppy, incorrect, or anything else, people might not take your submission as seriously. We don't want that. So, in addition to your visualization, looking at statistics are also important. Like, if you have a really close p-value or an r-squared value for your forecasting, or if you plug your forecasting into something else that suggests it and that has a really high p-value, r-squared value, like include that. Don't disregard conferences bills. This counts a little bit less, but yeah, like if you're gonna make a graph, labeling, statistics, all good. Don't just label it like X and Y, although the r-squared values here is really nice, but also do like temperature versus year, etc., etc. Can also bin data, like if you wanted to do, look at the difference between like 1900 and 1910 and like categorize it by decade, and you wanted to bin it like that, like that's also totally cool. Here's how you can do some bar graph binning. Like this is kind of what it looks like. As you can see, we're separating things into different bins here. Basically what we're talking about. Obviously label your bins. Like here we have under 3 years, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 14 years, blah, blah, that's all good. When you're presenting the data to the public, aka the Datathon committee, you want to make sure that the results are understandable and not misleading. So, for example, this is difficult to understand. What does this really mean? We're not too sure. How can somebody have 150 of blank? What's this Pilgrim guy doing here? I don't know. When you put a bar graph down, it's also good to add, or any graph or chart really, it's also good to add like a small section explaining what you're doing with it. What does this mean? Why is it here? That's also, the bar graph or pie chart or whatever kind of visualization you use may make a lot of sense to you, and that's great if it does. I love that for you. But sometimes it's like, oh man, I'm seeing this for the first time, I am grading you, and it's like, what even is this? This is also a misleading chart. Like, as you can see, this woman here is way tinier than the Latvian woman here. That's not a good scale. If you do anything like that, just make sure your sizes are consistent. Again, with here, we're not really like, is the blue for Democrats? Is the red for Republicans? You know, why is there no bar graph down here? Again, checking labels, like, you know, but what does that sort of thing mean? I like, you know, by the end of 2025, but then 2027, just make sure that your stuff is consistent. Again, this doesn't add up to like 100%. What is that? Don't do that. Don't make something that's really hard to read, like make these bars white and opaque or something. Don't, like, you might think you have like a really, really strong point, but don't manipulate your visuals. Make sure they look consistent. Like, why does 94 look smaller here than up here and 3% look larger and stuff like that? Include your numbers too. If you make a pie chart, including that like 63% or 73% increase over a decade instead of like just a 2/3-ish section of the pie is a strong chart. Using the correct kind of graph is important. I think for you guys, mostly for the time series, it's probably going to look mostly like line graphs and stuff. You can, if you want, like what some people in the climate sphere do is instead of having a line graph that kind of goes, let me draw, straight like this, or it's just like, oh no, the climate's increasing. They'll have something like this where they set the 0 mark is like the average temperature in the 1950s, and then show how the temperature has increased from 1950 with like a blue jag down here and like a red jag up here. Let me. Okay, so how can data be applied? Again, the conclusions you make in general, but also in the Datathon, can be applied and have real world consequences. Incorrect conclusions can have bad world consequences, and correct conclusions can potentially help certain groups of people or communities as a whole. So make sure that you're interpreting these results in good faith, researching what they might mean, kind of taking your stance from that. Yeah, this isn't that important. Okay. So here's an example data set report to kind of show you guys what I mean, not only in like, what does a good product look like, but also like, what does a bad product look like? Because I kind of did both. Okay. We're going back, we're going back. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. So this is mine. LOL, I'm using it so we can rip apart. Okay, the important thing I want you to know here is like, if I say, common themes among people are happy. These are things like close friends, exercise, generosity, gratitude, and sleep. I said it down here. This is like a Chicago format type style. When I go through like my methods, like I'm talking about how I visualize my data, I like spell them out for people so people can see what I'm thinking. When I make a graph, I include my p-value, my axes are clear to read. If I make more, you know, kind of like, this is why I did it this way, like I cite my source. Again, like if there's like a null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, I make sure to include that. You know, again, like with the citing sources is super helpful. I also want to use this because I can talk about what I did wrong with it. Because there was a lot of stuff that I did wrong here. My visualization was like good enough. Could have been better if I had been a little more experienced with ggplot, but I was also a freshman and had been doing data science seriously for like 2 months when I made this. I had like an impact section, which is like, why would we even care about this data? I iterated a bunch that correlation does not equal causation, and I use like a Spearman correction. So if you're doing stuff in your data and you know some like fancy statistics stuff that you want to include, like use that. Could have been better. Definitely should have used more multiple hypothesis testing. Like if I want to say with my forecast, like, oh, X and Y means this, and Y and Z means this, and B and C, you know, like if you're throwing multiple hypotheses or multiple claims out, definitely make sure that you're testing for multiple hypotheses. My data collection was sort of flawed. Not that like that really matters for you guys, but because you're not actually going to be collecting the data yourselves, but I put it here just so if you're going through research papers and you're like, oh, that looks a little funky, like just be mindful of where your data is coming from. So for your Datathon project, like what, oh no, okay, so this, oops. So the Happiness at Rutgers was a submission for Data 101. It was the Data 101 blog. This was not like a submission from last year's. For last year's people's Datathon, or I should say the spring 2023 Datathon, we didn't give a data set out. People actually had to go find their own data sets and do whatever they wanted with them. This year, you guys get like a very defined data set with a defined set of parameters to achieve, which is why I'm not showing you one from last year's, because I don't want anyone to get confused and like think that they're supposed to go and find their own data set. The reason I show you the blog is to kind of give an example of the exposition we would like to see when you guys make claims about your data, and also the sort of like source citation and potentially visualization that we would like to see when you guys submit your Datathon project. Does that make sense? I can't see anybody nodding and no one's putting anything in the chat, but I'm going to assume it does. If it doesn't, cool, just put something in the chat. Okay, so for your Datathon project, which again, you're getting your forecasting data and you're trying to you do something really cool technically with it, make a good best forecast, good use of AI, good research, whichever one of those. So for your product, make a good claim, one that claims, suggests, and doesn't assert. So what I mean by that is like when you're visualizing, when you've done your forecast, and maybe let's say your forecast shows that 2025 or whatever it is you have to find, average yearly temperature is going to be lower than 2015's. Don't say something like, this data says that climate change is actually going to be over by 2024. Say something like, this data suggests that we will see a lower average temperature in 2025 than we did in 2015. That's like a good claim. It doesn't assert anything. Make sure that your research is sourced well and supports whatever claim you have. So by the way, we can totally have a lower average temperature in 2015, but still see a increasing average temperature overall. That's something that you can totally research and explain the reasoning behind it and like kind of what it means for humanity. And also make data visualizations that are accurate and visually appealing. Again, you could totally just turn in your code and tell us basically what your code tells us is happening. But a really, really strong Datathon submission is going to have, my code suggests that this is happening, and that's what this means for the world. Here's why we care about it because of why, right? And it will have a really good visualization and presentation to kind of like back that up. So you don't have to have like 2 to 3 visualizations of your data. If this was from last year's, but like have just one good analysis of the relationship that you think is like interesting in the data and back it up with extra research. Make sure you submit whatever code you use, have your conclusion, like what you found in your series forecasting and like why it matters. Yeah, that's, also if you use AI, tell us about it. But that's kind of all we really had on that. This was just kind of how to have a really strong Datathon presentation visually, but also contextually. So I will stop recording now and we can go into our